What does it mean to be a caring person was my first question. And so I did what we always do when we have a question. We go online and have a quick search. And I came across this quote, if you wouldn't mind, James. I should say I got no idea who this Rachel Burgess is, other than that this quote from her was one of the first things that came up that caught my eye. So she said, "Caring people are polite, considerate, generous, affectionate, patient, understanding, loving and forgiving. They go out of their way to make others feel special, to make them happy or feel more confident in themselves. They're sensitive to others' feelings. They care what others have to say." Struck me that was quite a comprehensive list. I guess as Christians there's one thing that we struggle a bit, that is about being confident in ourselves, because that's something we associate with pride and arrogance, and we kind of recoil from a little bit. We'd rather she had said something like, appreciate their value or their worth, especially their value and worth to God. What I wanted to do this morning was to just pick out 4 or 5 instances in the life of the Lord Jesus and see how he demonstrated these characteristics in the way that he dealt with people. So, we can move to our first one, James. Mark chapter 12, verses 41 to 44. Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a fraction of a penny. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "I tell you the truth, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." I want you to imagine the scene in the temple. I'll stop moving around. All these rich people are coming in with their great big bags of... All these rich people coming in with their great big bags of coins, struggling with the weight of them, making their way through the crowds to the offering box. And then they're lifting up these bags of coins as high as they possibly can and pulling them out so that they fall as long as possible and make a great racket as they land in the offering box. And everyone's gasping and cheering and patting on the back, telling what a wonderful thing it is they've done. And there's this widow who's making her way slowly around the back of the crowd. No one sees her. No one notices her. No one moves out of the way to let her through. They even know she's there. They're oblivious. And she gets around to the front, gets around to where the offering box is and tosses in these 2 very small coins. And they barely make a sound as they hit in the box. And no one even notices, no one hears the noise over the noise and the din in the temple. No one sees, no one notices. No one that is apart from Jesus. Because Jesus saw, Jesus noticed, Jesus understood the significance of what that lady had done. Caring people, they notice things. They notice the small things, the small signs that no one else sees. The signs that show that someone is struggling or in need. They see things. They understand our situation might be difficult for someone. They see the things that the rest of us don't see, we miss. The small signs. Jesus saw them. Jesus saw this widow. Jesus saw her put those 2 very small coins in the treasury. And then he calls his disciples to him, and notice he says, this widow. He doesn't say, that widow over there making her way out to the exit. He says, this widow. And it makes it sound to me as though she was stood there with him. It makes it sound to me as though Jesus had got up from where he was sat and had gone over to speak to this woman. I wonder, how did Jesus know that she was a widow? How did Jesus know those 2 coins she put in were all she had to live on? Was it because he was the Son of God and knew everything? Or was it just because he had a conversation with her? He'd spoken to her. He'd spoken to her what had just happened. He'd heard her story. He understood. He knew, he cared. There's so much value in a conversation. Perhaps what that lady needed more than anything else that day was a conversation with someone who cared. And if I'm right that Jesus did get up and speak to her, I can't believe for one moment she left that temple empty-handed. I can't believe Jesus didn't turn to the disciples and say to her, stick your hands in our money bag and give us something to go home with, or give some food or something, because Jesus never sends anyone away empty-handed. Because Jesus cares about the needs that they have. But Jesus saw that woman. He understood her situation. He recognized her need. And he had care for her. He appreciated the value of what she had done. That's something else that caring people do. They appreciate the value of the things that people do. Whether they seem great or small to everyone else, caring people understand the value, the sacrifice that person has made. And Jesus knew the sacrifice that lady had made. Let's move on to the next section, James. There's another widow we're going to read about. This is from Luke chapter 7. This is from the New King James this time. Now it happened the day after, they went into a city called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him, and a large crowd. And when he came near the gate of the city, behold, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the city was with her. When the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said to her, "Do not weep." Then he came and touched the open coffin, and those who carried him stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." So he who was dead sat up and began to speak, and he presented him to his mother. When I selected this passage, I made the cardinal error of a speaker, is to pick a verse from one version and then put it on the screen from another. And you find the words not quite the same. I put all my slides from the NIV because I thought that was mostly would use, and I found the words are different for this verse. Because that first phrase jumped out at me. This happened the day after, and it made me ask, what happened the day before? And the previous story in Luke took place in Capernaum. And you have a quick look in any of the maps of your Bible, and if you've got Capernaum and Nain on them, you'll see that it's get on for 20 miles as the crow flies from the two. So if it really was the day after, Jesus had made an awful long journey to get to Nain. If you're reading in the NIV, you will see it says, sometime later, Jesus went to Nain. So I had to do a little bit of digging and see if I can work out what it should be. And as far as I can work out, the Greek literally means on the next, and then it stops. So the translators for the New King James have decided that meant on the next day. The translators for the NIV have thought, I don't know, we're not that brave. 20 miles in one day, that's a long way to walk. We'll just say sometime later. Either way, Jesus had made this journey from Capernaum to Nain. This 20 miles as the crow flies, I got no idea how long it would have taken in the route they took. Would have been longer, most likely. Jesus and the people with him would have been weary. They would have been tired, maybe hungry, maybe thirsty. If they travelled all that way in one day, it would have been the end of the day. It would have been evening time. It would have been late. And yet Jesus sees this funeral procession coming out of the city. And immediately he has compassion on this widow. Again, it seems that Jesus knew her circumstances. He had compassion. Despite his own tiredness, his own hunger, thirst, weariness, despite his aching feet, Jesus had compassion on this lady. And immediately he goes to her and he speaks to her. The NIV says that his heart went out to her. He was so moved by this lady and the sad circumstances that she found herself in. If she's a widow and this is her only son, then with no social security system or insurance system, this woman has lost all her source of income, all her source of provision. She's lost everything. It's her future. Everything's gone in the death of her son. And Jesus is moved with compassion for her. Despite his own suffering, despite his own needs, Jesus is just filled with the needs of others. He speaks to this lady, and then he does something. And I say, okay, that's easy for Jesus. He's got the power to raise the dead, so perhaps we had that power. We'd be doing things as well. There's always things that we can do. Sometimes a conversation is all people need. Sometimes there are practical ways that we can help. Things that seem insignificant and small to us, but can meet some need of theirs. Maybe it's just a meal. Maybe it's just a cup of coffee. Just time spent with them. Jesus understood that. And we often make excuses because we're tired, we're busy, we're stressed, we've got pressures, we've got things to do, places to go. Jesus had time for this lady. Even though it was probably the end of the day, even though he was tired and hungry, his needs didn't matter. He was consumed with meeting the needs of others. That's the kind of Saviour that we have. Always looking at the needs of others and how we can meet those. Let's go to our next set of verses. Matthew 14 this time, verses 13 to 16. When Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." Jesus replied, "They don't need to go away. You give them something to eat." Again, we have to ask ourselves, what's this first verse talking about when it says, when Jesus heard what had happened? This story comes immediately after Jesus has been told of the execution of John the Baptist. John was a relative of Jesus's. John was someone who Jesus thought so highly of. Jesus described him as said that of those born of women, there's none greater than John the Baptist. Jesus was grieving. Jesus was sorrowing. Jesus wanted to go to a quiet place where he could be by himself to grieve for John the Baptist. And yet these crowds get wind of what he's doing. They see him get into the boat and they run on ahead to the place where they expect him to land. When Jesus gets there and sees the crowd, again, we're told that he was filled with compassion for them and healed their sick. Despite that inner turmoil that he was obviously going through in his grief and sorrow, still, he's consumed with the needs of others. And he has compassion on them. He meets their need. He heals the sick. We're told that he taught the people all day. He cared for them. He cared for all their needs. And then gets to the end of the day. And the disciples get a bit panicky, wondering what they'd do with this crowd of people. And they say to Jesus, "Send them away. They need to go home. They need to make their own way home. They need to go and find food and bread. We haven't got anything to support them. Send them away." And Jesus says one of the most wonderful things he ever says. He says, "They don't need to go away." That's a caring person for you. Caring people have always got time. Caring people never send other people away when they have needs. Caring people are never too tired. It's never too late. Caring people are always available. Jesus says they don't need to go away. Jesus never sends anyone away. That's a Saviour we've got. Someone who never sends anyone away. Not these people, not us. No one. He's always got time. He's always got a plan. He always knows what he's going to do. Disciples were obviously freaked. But Jesus knew what he was going to do. The story continues with that feeding of the 5,000. When Jesus fed that great crowd with the 5 loaves and 2 fish that the young lad had, he knew what he was doing. He cares for these people. He was no way he was going to send them home hungry at the end of the day. Jesus never sends anyone away. Let's go to the next one. John chapter 8 this time. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "If any one of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw a stone at her." Again he stooped down and wrote on in the ground. And again, please, James, for the next one. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time. The older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." Once again, Jesus finds himself in a precious situation. We're told by John that this was a trap that the Pharisees and the elders had set for him. They were trying to catch him out because they knew that Jesus was a caring person. They knew the compassion that he had for people. And they were convinced there was no way Jesus was going to condemn this woman to death when she was stood right in front of him. Being a caring person makes you vulnerable. It brings you into challenging, difficult situations where people take advantage of you. Where sometimes You suffer for no fault of your own, just for being known for being a caring person. And Jesus knew that. Jesus experienced the same himself as he did this day. The hostility of these elders as they bring this lady before him, the humiliation they put on her, and they present him to Jesus to see what he would do. People often wonder, where was the man in this situation? Clearly she wasn't committed adultery by herself. Why was it only the lady, the woman, who was brought before Jesus? Maybe it was chauvinism, maybe it was sexism. Maybe it was because they thought that Jesus wouldn't have a problem with condemning a man. But maybe he'd be weaker, he'd be more susceptible to giving in for a woman. More susceptible to stepping away from the law. Maybe the man had already been stoned, we don't know. This is a trap. It's playing on Jesus' compassion. Jesus cared for people and loved for people. Because Jesus in his wisdom barely looks at these Pharisees and elders, but asks them, the one without sin, to cast the first stone. Thank God for that first person to walk away. That first person to realise that they couldn't claim to be without sin. We're told from the eldest to the youngest they walked away. That oldest, wisest person there realised that they were in the wrong. And they put theirs on their stone and walked away. And one by one, everyone left her. And then Jesus straightens himself up and looks at the lady. The irony is that he was the only one who could pick up a stone to stone her, because he was the only one without sin. And yet he dealt with her in love and compassion. He spoke to her so gently, so different to the way those Pharisees and elders had spoken to her and treated her. He treats her with dignity, with respect. Has no one condemned you, he says. She says, no one, sir. Neither do I condemn you. And when Jesus forgave anyone their sin, he was committing himself once again to the path to Calvary. Because that was another sin that he was going to suffer for. Another sin he was going to die for. And he has no hesitation in saying to this lady, I do not condemn you. Praise God that God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world. It was true for this lady, it's true for us. Despite our mistakes, despite our weaknesses and our faults, Jesus doesn't condemn us. He saves us. We live in a world that's quick to condemn, a world that's quick to point the finger, a world that likes to point the blame and know who it is to accuse and to put all the responsibility on for causing the problem. Caring people don't condemn. Caring people forgive. Caring people are willing to give a second chance. Caring people get let down. They do it again. They give another chance. Jesus was a caring person. Right, we press on. We've got a couple more to go through. John 4 this time. When the Lord learned of this, he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria, so he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there. And Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about the 6th hour. And the next one please, James. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, will you give me a drink? His disciples had gone into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, you're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. Jesus was leaving the region of Judea where he and his disciples had been baptizing people. What he'd heard was that the Pharisees, they got wind that Jesus was baptizing more people, or his disciples were baptizing more people than John the Baptist. And so Jesus decides to head back to Galilee. And John says he had to go through Samaria. Jesus didn't really need to go through Samaria. There's other routes back to Galilee. And most Jews would have chosen the route following the River Jordan, most likely. They would have avoided Samaria at all costs because, as John says to us, The Jews had no dealings with Samaritans. They avoided them like the plague. Didn't want to go near them. Jesus needed to go through Samaria. Jesus had somewhere he needed to go, someone he needed to see. He needed to go through Samaria. And he arrives at Sychar at midday. I don't know what time he set out that morning, but presumably he's only been walking for maybe 3 hours or something. And already he's weary from the journey. We can only assume it was a tough journey, tough terrain to cross, maybe a very hot, sunny day, with the warm Mediterranean sun beating down on them. And Jesus gets to Sychar, and he's weary. Jesus was willing to put himself out for the benefit of others. It was a tough journey he was taking that day, but he needed to be at Sychar to meet this woman. Caring people put themselves out for others. Caring people don't stand there and consider the cost and think, I'm not doing that, sorry, it's too much. I can't do that for you. Caring people count the cost and think, yep, it's going to cost me, but I'm going to do it anyway. That's what Jesus did. He counted the cost and did it anyway. That was his nature. We haven't got time to read the conversation Jesus had with that woman. It's a conversation, again, where Jesus treats someone with dignity and respect, lets them speak, doesn't talk over them, lets them say what they have to say. The disciples, it says, were amazed that Jesus was talking to this lady, but he was. And I would encourage you to go away and read that conversation. Jesus was able to meet her need that day. Unlike the other people we've read about, she didn't have a physical need that was obvious, but she had a spiritual need. This lady who had 5 husbands and was now living with someone else who wasn't her husband. Such a mixed up life, mixed up background, and yet there was something in her that was looking for God, because Jesus could speak to her about worshipping God. And she engaged in that conversation. Jesus knew where she was. And she engaged him in this business of worshipping God and where he should worship God. And how when Messiah came, he would tell him everything. And Jesus could say to her that he was he. She had all sorts of, a messed up home background for a start. Misconceptions, misunderstandings about who God was. Jesus didn't criticize her. He didn't talk over her, he didn't criticize her. He treated her with such respect. He let her speak. Let her say what she needed to say before stepping in and expanding her understanding. Jesus ended up staying in the village for 2 days. 2 whole days coming from this time when he needed to go through Samaria. We're almost out of time, so we've got one more story to look at. Mark 1 this time. A man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, "If you're willing, you can make me clean." Filled with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." Immediately the leprosy left him and he was cured. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. "See that you don't tell this to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them." Instead, he went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news. As a result, Jesus could no longer enter the town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. Yet the people still came to him from everywhere. It's not the only time in the Gospels we read of Jesus meeting someone who had leprosy. One of the skin diseases that was so badly misunderstood at the time, the diseases that made people an outcast. Diseases that made people avoid them. And this man comes to Jesus and begs him on his knees to heal him, to make him clean. "If you're willing," he says. Jesus is always willing to make people clean. And Jesus is filled with compassion and reaches out and touches the man. I wonder when the last time was anyone touched that man. How significant it was to him to feel the touch of Jesus. Jesus touched him. And obviously, immediately, he was healed. The leprosy left him and he was clean. Once again, Jesus is filled with compassion and acts and responds to meet the need of someone. And yet this time, in many cases, is a tragedy. Because no sooner is this man healed, then he lets Jesus down. Jesus gives him this instruction not to tell anyone what's happened to him, but go and show himself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that were required by the law when you were healed of leprosy. And instead, the man goes and blabs to everyone. Goodness knows whether he ever made it to the temple. Goodness knows whether he ever made the sacrifices that he was supposed to. Whether he ever got inspected by the priests. And as a result, Jesus' life got more difficult. He couldn't enter the town openly anymore. He had to stay outside in the lonely places. Caring people get hurt. Caring people get let down by the people they're caring for. But they do it anyway. I don't suppose it was a surprise to Jesus what this man did. Jesus probably knew it was going to happen. But he cared for the man anyway. He was still filled with compassion and met his need anyway. Even though he was let down and hurt by him. Even though it made his life more difficult afterwards. Jesus still healed the man. Because caring people can't help themselves, they keep on caring. Even when they've been hurt, even though there's times when they say, not do it anymore because it's not worth it, before long they're doing it again because they can't help it. They're caring people. It's what they do. Jesus had to stay outside in the lonely places. There's often a cost to caring. A cost that perhaps some people are not willing to pay. Jesus was willing to pay the cost of caring. We know that, don't we? Ultimately, he paid the cost of caring for us to the point of going to Calvary. If he's prepared to pay that cost for us, then there's no other cost that he would refuse to pay. For this man, he was prepared to pay the cost of staying outside in lonely places for that man to be healed. Because Jesus was a caring man. We come back to our question. If you wouldn't mind, James, for the next slide. We started with, what does it mean to be a caring person? Hopefully in the verses we've seen all these things and more demonstrated in the life of Jesus. And so it leads us to the conclusion on the last slide, James. To be a caring person is to be like Jesus. And that's the challenge for us. To be people who care like Jesus. No, I should say I don't stand here today as you are someone who's got this crack, because I ain't. Not by anywhere close. I'm fortunate to have people in my life who are much closer at it than I am and can drag me along with them. But to be like Jesus means to become caring people. We need to be people who count the cost but still do it. People who keep our eyes and ears open and notice the small things and see when people have difficulties in their lives and see what we can do to help. People who notice when times are hard and situations are difficult. It doesn't need to be great big things. We don't need to be wealthy. We don't need to have lots of things to give. For most times, the most important thing we give is our time. To let people know we've got time for them, that we're willing to care, is often all we need. Just having a conversation with someone will lead you to things you can do for them, things to help. But the challenge for us is to be like Jesus and to care like he did.